As he had been living in a wooden house outside the city recently, and people would visit him from time to time, Matthew decided to set Mondays and Tuesdays as his rest days every week. He would return home to live in the next 2 days and deal with some matters related to him in the town. However, he did not expect this. The number of visitors on his first rest day had already exceeded 5. Fortunately, the living room was big enough. After the initial reception, Matthew went over one by one and asked why they were here. Sif was there for a class. The value of a super version of the magic bag was obviously not something that could be offset by a hasty history class. In fact, Matthew was already mentally prepared to give her a private lesson for half a year. Rieger's reason for being there was more interesting. Matthew guessed that the father and daughter had been arguing at home already. In the end, Rieger promised Sif to come to Matthew's place every Monday for tuition, but the condition was that he had to follow along. Matthew did not have any objections to this. After all, when it came to lectures, it didn't matter how many students there were. As long as Rieger didn't get in his way, there wouldn't be a problem. Among the other visitors, Blake had come to ask Matthew if he needed help with the guarding of the oak forest. He knew that Matthew had been staying in the oak forest recently, and he happened to receive an order to increase patrols, so he came to ask Matthew if he needed the help of the garrison. Zeller and Richard's visit was obviously related to the ritual of plunder that Matthew recalled. As for Samantha, she brought the information about the Sioux country as promised. In the living room, Matthew's brain spun rapidly. He was preparing to arrange the reception according to the priority of the matter. At this moment, Sif stood up obediently. "Matthew, since you have so many guests, I'll go to the kitchen with Peggy first." As she spoke, she decided to drag the confused Rieger to the kitchen. But at this moment, Zeller, who had been smiling, said, "I took a look around outside. There's actually nothing particularly urgent for Matthew, right? I heard from Sif that she's here for your lessons. I've long been interested in Mr. Matthew's history class. If you don't mind, you can teach Sif first while we listen from the side. Isn't this a very novel experience?" It was unknown if it was due to his high charm. Zeller's words received unanimous approval from the others. Yes. I've long heard that Matthew's class is very popular, but I haven't had the chance to attend it. Blake scratched his beard, his face filled with interest. Richard elegantly put his cane aside. "Sure, I have no objections." Rieger was originally there to accompany the lecture, so he naturally wouldn't say anything. Samantha was the only one left. Matthew looked at her questioningly. The latter smiled sweetly. "My knowledge of history is almost zero. If you don't mind, I'd like to sit down and listen too." Thus, the slightly disturbed living room quickly quieted down. Everyone looked at Matthew curiously. Matthew wasn't afraid. He treated the living room as a school and the adults in front of him as children. He took out the thick history book that he had prepared for Sif. Just as he was about to open the book and begin his lecture. At this moment, a faint voice came from the kitchen. "Matthew, remember to make it exciting. The first lesson can be free, but the lessons after this will not be free." Matthew smiled helplessly. He cleared his throat. "Last time, I told Sif about the historical event of the 100 City Division. This event is actually familiar to everyone. It means that the influence of the Alliance of Seven Saints on the city-states across the continent has reached an unprecedented peak. Its effect was objective. After the division, every major city on the continent had at least one mage from the Seven Saint Alliance. These mages had made indelible contributions to the development and construction of their respective cities. Even after 100 years, people would never forget the contributions of that batch of mages. Of course, the subsequent development of the 100 Cities division didn't follow the Seven Saint Alliance's plan. In the actual implementation of the plan, many flaws appeared, so much so that there were several disputes within the alliance over whether to continue the strategy or not. From the perspective of hindsight, this plan was actually a failure. Hundreds of years after the gods had left, the largest human organization in Anger was still the loose Seven Saint Alliance, which was essentially a mage organization. The human kingdom is just a name that the Seven Saint Alliance has created. In fact, we all know that no human force on this continent is qualified to be called a kingdom. We have towns, cities, manor owners, and lords, but we don't have a kingdom or a king. And all of this was thanks to the gods. At this point, Matthew paused for a moment and took a sip of water while observing everyone's reaction. There were 6 audiences present. Half of them were confused. They were Sif, Blake, and Samantha. The remaining 3 revealed thoughtful expressions. "Isn't this what it should be like?" Isn't this a good thing? Under Matthew's encouraging gaze, Samantha boldly asked. Whether it's humans, elves, or druids, we're all doing pretty well now. I mean, the structure of a city-state is also very good. People don't disturb each other, so why must we form a kingdom? Matthew did not answer immediately. He looked at Rieger. The latter's expression was also very serious. He actually took the initiative to say, in terms of social organization, a kingdom that can control more city-state resources at the same time will be a more advanced, risk-resistant, and powerful existence than an independent city-state. I've traveled to other worlds, and many of their places are indeed more developed than ours. The simplest and crudest example is that if a kingdom composed of multiple city-states declared war on an independent city-state, the latter would almost certainly lose. Matthew nodded in agreement. We all know the principle of strength in numbers. As a social creature, an organization that could allow more humans to form groups would definitely trample over those fighting alone. In fact, the transition from a single city-state to a union of many city-states was inevitable in the development of history. This point could be verified by the development of other planes or worlds. We might not have much information in this area, but the Seven Saint Alliance has looked into it a lot. Sif was puzzled. Then why hasn't there been a kingdom on the continent yet? Weren't the gods exiled long ago? Matthew said in a deep voice, you might forget what I'm about to say after hearing it today, but it doesn't matter. Forgetting doesn't mean that the truth doesn't exist. We all know that 470 years ago, the founder of the Seven Saint Alliance, the Great Existence whose name is still unknown to the people. We usually respectfully address her as the first and only calamity mage in human history. She was angry at the gods' lack of progress and enslavement of all living beings, so she personally planned and executed the most wonderful mage performance in history, Ascension of the Heavenly Palace. Our world had been stuck in the Age of Enlightenment that the gods limited for a full 2,000 years. In the past 2,000 years, there had been no significant progress in human society. 2,000 years ago, human ancestors fished in the river and farmed on the ground. 2,000 years later, their descendants still used the same fishing tools and farming methods. At that time, the world was lifeless, and you could not feel the progress of the world from the changes of time. This was because, in the early days of the Age of Enlightenment, the gods who divided the theocracy and faith had woven rules and regulations for everything in the world. They used their clergy to divide their territories and bound everything with their concepts. They treated this world as their pasture. They only wanted to harvest the faith of all living beings day after day. They were not willing to see their believers make any meaningful progress. Time was meaningless to this world. It was just a counter for the gods to harvest faith. Under the high pressure of the gods, all living beings could not save themselves, they could not even develop the consciousness to save themselves. Until the arrival of the Calamity Mage, this situation was finally broken. That day, all the statues on the continent collapsed. Countless shrines or temples rose out of thin air, and the heavenly palace, which symbolized the glory of the gods in the past, also soared into the sky. They carried and bound the will of the gods and flew to the highest point of the astral world with a shrill cry. People knelt around the temple in fear. They did not know what had happened. To this day, we still don't know what happened that day. We only know that after that day, most of the existences that had been touched by the divine in this world were banished forever by the Calamity Mage. This is the ascension of the heavenly palace. Matthew's tone was very calm. However, the history itself was enough to shock all audiences. Even Rieger and Zeller. They might have heard of the ascension of the heavenly palace. However, they only vaguely knew that that was when the gods left. They didn't know that the gods had been exiled. They couldn't imagine that the one who banished the gods was a mere human mage. Is this a myth? Rieger muttered, I thought it was the seven saints who joined forces to reach an agreement with the gods. And the gods left willingly. Matthew smiled and shook his head. The seven saints were very strong, but they were not strong enough to bargain with the gods. In history, they were all disciples of the Calamity Mage. After the gods left, our world finally began to change. Farmers invented farming tools and discovered crops with higher yields. Fishing boats floated on the seas and rivers. We had fishing nets, harpoons, and all kinds of new fishing gear. Tailors found better materials than cotton, linen, and animal skins. The craftsmen improved the craftsmanship and production process. City-states rose up one after another, and human exchanges became more frequent. According to normal development, we should have welcomed the first true human kingdom long ago. However, the gods who were far away were still unwilling to be left out. After the calamity mages left, they imposed 3 curses on the land in an attempt to delay the changes of the world and ensure that the divine concepts they defined continued to exist. Hearing this, everyone's expression was solemn. They were all shocked by this mysterious and bold narration, and at the same time, they were extremely curious about the curse of the gods that Matthew mentioned. He took a sip of water and continued. I only know 2 of the 3 curses. The last one was not even introduced in the book that great mage Ronan gave me. The 2 curses that I know of are known as the intelligence lock and the civilization lock. As he spoke, he first explained the contents of the locks. Then, he explained civilization lock. Similar to the intelligence lock, the curse of the gods has actually taken away a part of what made us humans. The intelligence lock takes away the memory ability of history and knowledge of all humans with intelligence below 15 points, while the civilization lock blocks the possibility of the evolution of human civilization. As he spoke, Matthew looked at Rugger. Mr. Rugger, you are the lord of Rolling Stone Town. You have a large territory, including 16 villages in the north and south and 2 trading posts. But have you ever thought of expanding the scale of Rolling Stone Town? Have you ever thought of annexing the surrounding cities? Don't you want more power? Rugger frowned and thought for a while, then shook his head hard. My rationality tells me that what you said is not a bad idea, but for some reason, I'm not interested in the concept of expanding my domain. Is this the function of the civilization lock? Matthew nodded. If you were the only one who despised expanding territory, then it might be a coincidence. However, almost all the city lords have no ambition to annex the territory around them. This is clearly the power of the curse. Samantha suddenly said. But isn't it a good thing that there's no war? At least there wouldn't be so many people who would be displaced and separated from each other. Matthew replied seriously. That is true from an individual point of view, but objective laws cannot be ignored. If our civilization remains stagnant, we may one day die suddenly, perhaps due to an accident or an invasion from an enemy. This is not an exaggeration, but these are words left behind by the calamity mage within the Alliance. I believe that she came from beyond the heavens, so she must have witnessed the rise and fall of some civilizations. The reason why she made the decision to exile the gods was probably not because of anger, but something else. Samantha was stunned. Although her thinking was old-fashioned, she was quite smart. She instantly understood Matthew's meaning. Are you saying that our world might be invaded by foreign enemies in the future? In the face of such an enemy, we could only survive by having all the races form a kingdom. Matthew blinked. It is indeed possible. The Seven Saint Alliance has made many guesses about this, but they are all just guesses at the moment. After all, the existence of purgatory and abyss has been proven. If demons or devils invade our world one day, it will be difficult for us to survive on our own strength without the protection of the gods. All in all, the era of the gods was long gone. Even if there were curses left behind, their power would become weaker and weaker. According to Master Ronan's prediction, our world is on the eve of rapid changes. In the next second, this world might undergo earth-shattering changes. I think we're lucky to be born in this era. At the very least, compared to our ancestors, we will have the opportunity to use our own strength to change the world, or even, to redefine some new concepts. Samantha looked at Matthew thoughtfully. Like nature. Matthew smiled and closed his book. That will be the content of the next class. Peggy, who appeared out of nowhere, interrupted. That's right, that's right. After the lesson. In the living room, there is only silence. Everyone was silently digesting the cognitive shock brought by Matthew. Matthew himself was also using this to strengthen his memory. His intelligence was high enough to be immune to the intelligence lock, but there was a certain chance that he would forget. Teaching was a good way to strengthen his memory, which was the main reason why he did not reject giving everyone a lesson that night. 10 minutes later, Matthew took a bag of documents from Samantha and sent her away. At the door, Samantha suddenly turned around and looked into Matthew's eyes. Is Eli with you now? Matthew explained frankly. He was grateful for my unintentional enlightenment in his domain, so he temporarily worked as a forest ranger at my forest. Samantha nodded thoughtfully. Is the forest the origin of your oak domain? Matthew nodded. Your domain enlightenment is very special and left a deep impression on me. That oak forest is the same. Perhaps I should find time to go there and take a look. Samantha bit her lip. Her eyes drifted as she said this. Then, she transformed into a leopard and jumped away. The second to leave was Blake. Matthew was very grateful that Big Beard always remembered him. The two of them discussed for a while. In the end, he rejected Blake's suggestion to increase the number of patrols near the oak forest. This might alert the enemy. Blake's alternative was to set up a hidden sentry not far from the oak forest. Most of the time, there would be guards on duty. This way, once a battle broke out in the oak forest, Blake would be the first to receive the news and rush over to provide support. Matthew did not feel invincible just because he had the bone dragon. It was safer to have the support of the garrison. Blake agreed to this request. He patted his chest and assured Matthew that the secret sentry would be set up tomorrow night at the latest. This made Matthew feel much more at ease. Finally, it was Zeller and Richard. Matthew, according to what you said about the initiation ritual, we have picked out 3 iconic buildings: the giant windmill in the North Trade Station, the Black Vulture Inn in the South Trade Station, and the Seven Saints Square in Rolling Stone Town. If a bloody tragedy happens in these 3 places, it will definitely shock the entire Rolling Stone Town the next day. At present, we have secretly strengthened the reconnaissance and patrols in these 3 places. Zeller asked quickly. In addition, our operation must begin. Are you ready? Matthew knew that Zeller's plan was for him to disguise himself as Ronin and create a cloud of suspicion to slow down the evil organization's pace of crime. I don't have a problem with it, but you have to tell me your plan first. Matthew replied. The Late Spring Festival is coming soon. We all know that every year during the Late Spring Festival, the Great Mage Ronin will release huge magic fireworks in the Seven Saints Square, the North-South Trade Post, and some small villages to celebrate the prosperity of spring with the residents. Zeller calmly explained, but in fact, Ronin is very busy. There were several years when he was not in Rolling Stone Town during the Spring Festival. Those fireworks were set off by his apprentice. In order not to affect the festive atmosphere, he had already made arrangements for this. At present, there were still some devices in the warehouse of the city hall that could release magic fireworks, so releasing fireworks itself was not a problem. This year, we couldn't contact Ronin, and we didn't hear from his apprentice. If we want to make it look like he's still with us, the key is his image. It's difficult to fool the enemy with just makeup. We need the help of magic. Matthew shook his head. I don't know anything about transfiguration. Zeller smiled gently. What a coincidence. Me too. However, I have another way. Since our goal is to create a false sense of confusion, there's no need to make everything seem real. We just need to keep them suspicious. I don't think they'll come up close to check whether you're the real Ronin or not. I'll try my best to dress you up as Ronin and then use the mirror image spell to send your image to all parts of Rolling Stone Town. At that time, someone else will set off the fireworks. What you need to do is to make yourself look like a great mage. After all, you are the only mage we can find in our town. Matthew put his hands together and thought for a while before finally agreeing to Zeller's plan. There was no risk in this plan. If it could really deter the evil organization, it would be considered a merit. Immediately, the two of them discussed many details. All the way until late at night. Zeller reluctantly left Matthew's house with Richard, who was yawning crazily. Meanwhile, Sif had been brought home by Rieger. After all the guests had left, the lively atmosphere instantly disappeared. Matthew sat alone in the living room, enjoying the sweet silence. He sat. His chest suddenly felt as if it had been pried open by something powerful. The scenery in front of him began to blur. Matthew's heart skipped a beat. Suddenly, he saw that the gray comma of the Tai Chi symbol had been filled up without him realizing it. At this moment, countless gray dots were jumping out of it. Hint, you are visiting the subdomain of death, undying. Looking up, he saw an endless plain. Countless craters were scattered across the ground. The sky is grayish-brown. The same was true of the horizon. A huge full moon hung between heaven and earth. It was like the undying soul fire. The silence was the eternal theme here. Even the wind was silent. Endless whirlwinds came from an unknown place and blew to the next unknown place. The undead creatures that were swept up by the whirlwind either choked and fell or regained their vitality. Death and metamorphosis played out different stories in the same negative energy whirlwind. Matthew walked alone on this quiet land. It was different from the lively and noisy experience in the oak tree domain. Everything here was so quiet. It was very similar to the concept of this place. Death. A skeleton walked towards him. Almost none of its bones were intact, and its soul fire was pitifully weak. It seemed that as long as a gust of wind blew, this newborn skeleton soldier would lose its last chance to live again. However, it was very tenacious. Matthew saw with his own eyes that it was blown into a bottomless pit by the negative energy whirlwind. According to his guess, this skeleton would definitely fall apart. And that indeed happened. Matthew noticed that it stayed in the hole for a long time. It was so long that Matthew began to doubt whether time had meaning in this domain. At a certain moment, he saw the skeleton climb out of the hole again. The earlier tornado had destroyed its last remaining thigh bone. It managed to recover a little before it struggled to get up from the ground. Matthew noticed. The soul fire in its eyes burned even brighter. It turns out that undead creatures also have such a strong will to live. Matthew was slightly moved. This skeleton clearly did not have much intelligence. It did not even know where it should go. However, from the moment it ignited its soul fire, it possessed the instinct to survive. Perhaps in the next moment, it would be completely extinguished by another whirlwind. But before that, it would continue to move forward. To that unknown place, a place where the fire of life could bloom. After stopping for a moment, Matthew continued forward. Along the way, he brushed past all kinds of undead creatures. Zombies, ghosts, banshees, vampires, ghouls, headless horsemen, death horsemen, dark knight, abomination, tomb guard, mummy. Some of them were strong, and some were weak. However, they were all heading towards the unknown. Here, none of the undead creatures knew what was ahead. Very few people could explain the purpose of constant moving. But moving forward was the only purpose. Death is eternal silence, and the undead are existences that persist in advancing in eternal silence. They may not be actual living creatures, but they are just like living creatures, fighting against death tirelessly. They were destined to be unable to escape the barrier of death, but they could no longer be simply regarded as the vassals of death. This is the undead. Matthew came to the end of the horizon with this conclusion. He stood in front of the eternal full moon. A wind blew from above. So the negative energy wind is blowing down from the moon. He curiously looked at the celestial body that was close at hand but far away on the horizon. In the next second, the scene in front of him shattered like a mirror. The view shook slightly. Matthew's consciousness returned to his living room. Based on the accumulation of summoning undead creatures and the exploration of negative energy planes, you have successfully entered the subdomain of death, undying. As a reward for stepping into the domain, you can choose one of the following 3 abilities. Undead body, your body can instantly transform into the shell of an undead creature. During this period, you will obtain the immunity and other characteristics of the undead creature. In the state of undead body, you will have the opportunity to gain more understanding of the undying domain. Lasts for 60 seconds once a day. Negative energy control, you will gain the opportunity to control negative energy. After choosing this ability, you will have the opportunity to obtain some negative energy spells. New summon, you will receive a random summoned undead that is not lower than tier 3. It was a difficult choice. Matthew frowned slightly. Unlike the Oak domain and the Temperance domain, he really wanted the 3 abilities given by the Undying domain. As for the undead body, it was a life-saving skill and had the chance to increase the exploration progress of the Undying domain. Negative energy control was the ability that necromancers dreamed of. With this ability, casting negative energy-related spells would be twice as effective. After all, the 2 main skills of necromancers were summoning undead creatures and negative energy spells. As for the third option, new summon, it was less tempting. Matthew actually did not lack undead followers, but it would be perfect if he could summon a headless horseman or a dark knight. This would make up for his lack of strong followers in the melee. Although Peggy was also very fierce, Matthew was not willing to risk her life. Or death. He hesitated. Matthew gritted his teeth and chose the undead body. This was also out of consideration for the unity of knowledge and action. He didn't want to miss any life-saving skill, not to mention that this ability could increase the progress of the exploration of the Undying domain. Perhaps it could lead to a virtuous cycle of progression. You have completed the enlightenment of the Undying domain. Current status, just entered the domain. You have obtained a permanent status, Undead Army. Undead Army, your maximum number of active summoned creatures has been increased by 10 times. You have obtained a temporary status, Pale Hand. Pale Hand, if not controlled, your right hand will continue to emit negative energy. When it comes into contact with any living thing, it will be instantly killed. Duration, 30 days. These 2 buffs are not bad. Matthew was quite satisfied. The Undead Army meant that the maximum number of his summoned creatures had increased to 120. This was a huge gap between him and an ordinary necromancer. The Pale Hand was equally powerful. It could inject negative energy into the undead creatures, making them energetic. At the same time, it could also give the enemy a fatal blow in an intense battle. although the probability of instant death was very low. But what if he succeeded? What Matthew had to lose was a chance. But the enemy could lose his life at any time. This was the power of a domain. Matthew noticed. At this moment, the Taiji symbol became balanced again. The green dot on the right was slightly fuller, but not by much. What was even more interesting was, there was a small brown comma right below the Tai Chi symbol. Its size was only 1/10 of the size of the top commas. There were also light spots in the small commas, but the number was very small. Matthew knew that it represented the temperance domain. Now, he had already dabbled in 3 fields: oak, temperance, and the undying. Although he was only in the initial stage, as time passed, he would obtain a higher level of mastery of the domain. The most common legendary requirement is to master 1 domain. A legend who dabbles in 3 domains at the same time is already an elite. I'm only a tier 2 necromancer, but I've already dabbled in 3 domains in advance. The greatest convenience that the system provided him was the stepping stone to the domains represented by death and nature. Under a situation where the experience was abundant, he only needed to plant trees slowly, accumulate levels and spells, and in the future, he would soar to the sky. 2 days have passed since the beginning of the year. Unknowingly, it was already the end of March. Rolling Stone Town welcomed the second festival of spring, Late Spring Festival. With the help of the Silver Moon zombies, Matthew's planting efficiency greatly increased. Before the Spring Festival, he had finally strengthened Soldier to level 14. He was only 1 level away from Matthew's highest level summoned creature, Filey. Other than the rapid advancement in level, Soldier also gained a series of new abilities such as Clone Technique, Ruthless Multi-Slash, Concealment Technique, Ground Shrinking, and Picking Onions on Dry Land. The quality of these keywords was only blue and white, but it also greatly enriched Soldier's combat methods. This Blade Dancer was like a nightmare for low and middle level adventurers. Of course, Matthew also encountered 2 questionable keywords. Alcoholic, Gray, your skeleton is addicted to alcohol. Every 72 hours, he needs to drink at least 1 bottle of ale to relieve his restlessness. Cross-dressing, Gray, your skeleton has awakened the power of drag. He desires to wear some bright clothes or skirts. If you can dress him up beautifully, he will feel very happy. To be honest, Matthew was stunned when he first saw these 2 keywords. A skeleton that was addicted to alcohol. How could he drink it? Once the drink entered his mouth, wouldn't it leak out? As for the other keyword, it was easier to satisfy. Soldier's Dark Night Cloak was getting more powerful. Matthew could easily find Soldier some beautiful dresses to wear underneath it. What made Matthew most dissatisfied was that whether it was to do drag or to drink, he had to spend money. In order to save costs, Matthew bought some of the cheapest ale, and Soldier drank it without hesitation. Just as Matthew expected, the ale immediately spilt down Soldier's throat. However, Matthew also noticed, a portion of the alcohol seemed to have been absorbed by Soldier's soul fire. This was actually very interesting. It seriously violated the law of the undead. Anyone who could break the rules was definitely not an ordinary person. In this aspect, Soldier was already on par with Peggy. This was one of the few things that made Matthew feel gratified. As for female clothing, Matthew went to the second-hand shop in town to buy 2 dresses. They were both tattered old ladies' clothes, but Soldier wore them with ease. It was just that Matthew wished he could unsee certain things. But aside from these small flaws, Soldier's strength had increased steadily. Late Spring Festival. Matthew brought only one of his underlings to the Lord's mansion. At this moment, the sky is dimly lit. The Spring Festival celebration had already begun. On the way, Matthew could hear the joyful sound of gongs and drums from the Spring Festival team outside the village. Late Spring Festival was the 3rd and last day of the last week of March. Spring in Rolling Stone Town came and went very quickly. 2 months ago, it was a snowy winter, and after March, it was a scorching summer. Therefore, there was a grand festival in March. There were the early Spring Festival at the beginning of the month and the Late Spring Festival at the end of the month. These 2 festivals were often celebrated grandly. They were also the 2 most significant festivals for the residents of Rolling Stone Town in the first half of the year. If they missed the Late Spring Festival, the next festival of the same scale would be the Harvest Festival in autumn. Today, regardless of whether it was the residents of the town or the farmers in the countryside, they all woke up very early. This was because most people were very keen to participate in the various activities of the Late Spring Festival. Unlike the early Spring Festival, which focused on celebrations, performances, and gatherings, the Late Spring Festival attracted more attention from the different competitions and activities organized by the residents. This tradition originated from the Age of Enlightenment. It was said that the gods at that time held various sports competitions in the spring to select warriors from the human race. Later, it gradually evolved into a semi-official entertainment activity. Anyone could apply for a contest with the officials of Rolling Stone Town. Once the application was approved, they would receive a subsidy from the city hall. The participants of the contest were all registered on the spot, and the main purpose was to be entertaining and lively. When Matthew passed by the entrance of the mage area in the morning, he found that the people in charge of the grass-eating competition and ring competition were already moving materials to the spot. Near 7 Saints Square, the most popular Martin Run event was also drawing the finish line. There was also the one-handed and one-legged wrestling competition and the face-to-face wrestling fight that were also in the process of preparation. The entire Rolling Stone town was thriving. This scene made Matthew feel a little enlightened. In the past years, due to his obsession with planting trees, he did not even have the chance to watch the late spring festival, let alone participate in it. Today, the rich festive atmosphere aroused the idea in Matthew of participating in a few activities. Unfortunately, he had another mission. Today, I am the great mage Ronin. With this thought in mind, under the guidance of the guards, Matthew and Soldier arrived at the side hall of the Lord's residence. Although it was early, the manor was already bustling with noise. The servants were busy decorating for the festival, and the masters did not sleep in. Matthew heard Sif's voice as he walked through a porch. "Oh, Daddy, I'm not a 15-year-old girl anymore. I don't want to dress like a little princess from a fairy tale today," Sif complained. "But even after the day after tomorrow, you will still be a 16-year-old girl." Rieger's voice was very gentle. "And isn't it good to dress like a little princess? They are very happy in the fairy tale." Sif snorted in dissatisfaction. "I don't like it. Those clothes are too childish. Even if it's a fairy tale, I want to wear them like the female knights in the fairy tales." Rieger was silent for a few seconds before he reluctantly said, "When you grow up, you'll have plenty of time to wear mature clothes. But today, promise me that you'll wear clothes that should be worn at your age, okay? These clothes are very beautiful. You might not wear them for a long time in the future. Just treat it as spending a few more years with them." There was a hint of reluctance in Rieger's voice. Sif was stunned for a moment, then happily agreed, all right, I'll listen to you. I'll pick a princess dress. I love you, Dad." Rieger's pampering voice drifted over. "I love you more, my little princess. Go to the next room and let Shia help you put it on." What a sharp child. Matthew could even imagine the change in expression on Sif's face when she heard what Rieger had said. Although this girl had a strong personality, her nature was sharp and gentle. At least she did not let down Rieger's love for her. Matthew did not stay in the corridor for long. They passed through 3 corridors in a row. He finally arrived at the destination of this trip, a domed building on the west side of the Lord's residence. This was the residence of Zeller, Rieger's only magic consultant. "You came on time. I was just about to get ready." Zeller, who was dressed fashionably and had a handsome face, came out to welcome him. His gaze lingered for a few seconds near Soldier, who was wearing the dark night cloak. Then he led Matthew into the house. "I've finished setting up the mirror image technique. I tested it twice yesterday, and the results were perfect." Zeller asked, "By the way, have you eaten?" "I've eaten fried spring rolls and a cup of yogurt," Matthew replied. "Peggy is such an enviable partner." Zeller looked enlightened. "I heard Sif mention that her culinary skills are superb." Matthew smiled and nodded. "Then I'll take you to get your makeup done." Zeller brought Matthew to the innermost room. There were many mirrors and a large number of bottles and jars of medicinal powders. Most of the materials were things that Matthew's knowledge was blind to. Although charm is bestowed by the heavens, as a man, you have to know how to take care of yourself and cherish it, Zeller explained with a smile. Then, like a hairdresser, he made Matthew sit down in front of a mirror. Then, he snapped his fingers in the mirror in front of Matthew. Suddenly, a blonde, blue-eyed woman with an explosive figure appeared. "Good morning, Zeller." The girl lazily rubbed her sleepy eyes as she walked out of the mirror. An incredible fragrance assaulted him. A force called desire began to tease Matthew's nerves. "Lesna, don't use your charm on my guest. He won't fall for it," Zeller ordered sternly. The girl stuck out her tongue. In the next second, she sat on the stage in front of the mirror with her legs crossed. Her short skirt was silently pulled up, revealing a large area of snow-white skin. A slender tail with a heart at the tip extended from the bottom and swayed unconsciously. This scene was enough to make most men's mouths go dry. However, Matthew looked at Zeller calmly. Is this the makeup artist you found for me? Zeller heaved a sigh of relief. This is Lesna, my contracted partner. In most cases, she is also my family. Hint, your ability Heart of Tranquil Water is in effect. You have successfully resisted the charm of succubus Lesna. Your will +1. Warlocks were indeed the legendary rich and handsome profession. Even their contracted creatures were blonde succubi, unlike a bitter necromancer like him, who could only accompany skeletons and zombies all day long. This thought flashed across Matthew's mind. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't envious. Matthew joked with Zeller, with such a charming contract partner, no wonder you haven't married yet. Zeller waved his hand. You're mistaken. My relationship with Lesna is very pure. Matthew didn't believe it. Can you control yourself? Before Zeller could say anything, Lesna complained to Matthew. To tell you the truth, I often wonder if Zeller likes men. He always treats me as if I'm nothing. Most of the time, my charm seems to be released to the air. Zeller smiled gently. Of course not. There's no doubt about Lesna's charm, but I have my own way of doing things. Frankly speaking, it was not easy to resist her charm. Sometimes, I would be impulsive and waver, but I saw it as a form of training and challenge. Fortunately, I could always maintain control. Lesna rolled her eyes. Matthew had a little eye-opener. He had heard that most warlocks had a very licentious private life. They would do it with any creature that moved. However, Zeller was clearly an exception among warlocks. He had a succubus pet, but he could sit still and cultivate his willpower. This made Matthew suspect this guy's sexual orientation. The three of them chatted for a while. The atmosphere in the room gradually became lively. Lesna began to put makeup on Matthew. According to Zeller, this succubus lady was an expert in the field of makeup and disguise. Most of the time, the makeup done by Lesna's hands had an effect that surpassed illusions. Matthew did not have much understanding of this for the time being. He could only feel Lesna's small hands holding a powder pad and a paintbrush as she smeared it all over his face. It was itchy. Her body was very close to him. It was the instinct of a succubus. Matthew could feel the strong hormones that she inadvertently emitted at all times. If it weren't for the heart like still water, he would have made a fool of himself by now. Lesna was very focused on her work, but her expression didn't look very happy. About an hour later, the boring makeup session finally came to an end. Lesna threw away the pink cushion in her hand in frustration and said in an unfriendly tone, "All right. Being in the same room with you two men is like going to jail. I thought you were scary enough, Zeller, but I didn't expect your friend to be the same as you. We've been glued together for so long, but he didn't react at all. Tell me. You must be gay too, right?" Her tone was very aggressive. However, her expression was full of frustration, and her eyes were filled with self-doubt. "I'm a normal man, but I'm better at temperance," Matthew explained calmly, not bothering to argue with a succubus. Then, he looked into the mirror and his eyes lit up. The man in the mirror was exactly the same as the great mage Ronin in his memories. Very exquisite craftsmanship. Matthew couldn't help but praise. This sentence made Lesna feel much better. She gently bit her lower lip and reminded him, "You'd better stuff a few more insoles into your shoes. I remember that Ronin is a few centimeters taller than you, and his body is also a little stronger than yours. But it doesn't matter. Anyway, you'll have a cloak to help cover it up later." As they spoke, Zeller had already walked over from the next room with a replica of the Archmage's robe and a magic cloak that Ronin used to wear on the late spring festival. "Why don't you try on the clothes first? I'll get someone to look for the insoles later." Zeller looked at Matthew's face seriously and then showed a satisfied expression. Matthew took out a height-increasing scroll from his magical bag. "If it's height, maybe this thing will come in handy." Zeller looked past the height-increasing scroll and focused on Matthew's bag for a few seconds. "Is it the super version?" Matthew was stunned for a moment before he nodded. "You sure know how to spend." "I've wanted to get a super magic bag for a long time," Zeller said. "But I was too short of money to get one." Lesna snorted coldly and interrupted, "If you stopped donating to the orphanage, you could have bought yourself more than a few bags already. Or perhaps, if you had established your own family earlier, you would have earned much more than you do now." Zeller shrugged. "Lesna, don't even think about it. I'm not leaving Rolling Stone Town. Never. I promised Ruger." Lesna was so angry that her chest heaved up and down. "That man again. I shouldn't have followed you because I thought highly of your potential. For the sake of Rieger, you even rejected the position of the Lord of Dragon Nest City. I think the man's wife was not as loyal to him as you were to him. Enough. Zeller's tone suddenly became stern. In front of the guests, please pay attention to your words. Lesna was obviously hot-tempered, or rather, she had a strong sense of resentment from the beginning to the end. Did you just yell at me? How many times have you scolded me for Rieger? You. A loud slap sounded. Lesna was slapped to the ground by Zeller. You seem to be pushing your luck, succubus. Zeller bent down and pinched her chin hard. His tone was unprecedentedly cold. If you're really dissatisfied with the current situation, I can send you back to the abyss at any time, no matter which demon lord's territory it is. But if you still want to stay by my side, you should learn to behave yourself. Promise me that this will be the last time. Lesna's eyes were filled with fear. She stammered, I promise, this is the last time. The last time what? Zeller asked coldly. This is the last time I tried to take advantage of you. I was wrong, Zeller. I didn't manage to arouse your friend's lust, so I was a little muddle-headed. Lesna replied with a trembling voice, don't send me back to the abyss. I beg you. They'll break me. Very good. Now apologize to Matthew. Zeller let go. Lesna stumbled and fell to the ground, 2 bruises on her smooth chin. I'm sorry, Mr. Matthew. I shouldn't have spoken nonsense in front of you. She apologized nervously. Matthew waved his hand, indicating that it was fine. Lesna was instantly relieved. With Zeller's permission, she carefully entered the mirror in front of Matthew and disappeared completely. I've embarrassed myself in front of you, Matthew. Zeller returned to his gentle and amiable appearance. Demons are different from ordinary creatures. If I treat them kindly, they will be more likely to be ungrateful and convalescent. Lesna is an example. If I don't punish her occasionally, she might think that she is my master. As he spoke, he smiled helplessly. Your summoned creature, Peggy, I see that you treat her very well too. Will she show such signs too? Matthew could understand Zeller's helplessness. Demons were indeed a unique species and could only be controlled by using both and cruelty. Thinking of this, he didn't envy Zeller for having a succubus anymore. At least his kindness with his summons was rewarded. No. Matthew smiled. Peggy has a lot of shortcomings, but overall, her personality is quite cute. The only thing that annoys me is that she often asks for a raise in salary, but I don't think that's her fault. A hint of envy appeared in Zeller's eyes. Then, shall we get up and change? The celebration is about to begin, and we're going to set off fireworks at the climax of the celebration. Matthew nodded. Then, he hesitated. What's wrong? Zeller asked. Although it's a little presumptuous, and the timing isn't right, can I ask Lady Lesna to charge my magic staff? Matthew took out his cough magic staff in embarrassment. He had followed the method of Tower Spirit 177 and charged the staff by holding the staff and imagining coughing. The result was shockingly inefficient. About 3 seconds of imagination counted as one official charge, but at least 10,000 official charges were needed to charge the staff fully. Matthew had originally planned to charge it slowly, but since he had run into a succubus, he might as well take advantage of it. After all, Matthew didn't ask Zeller or the officials of Rolling Stone Town for compensation for helping him this time, right? Zeller took the staff and studied it for a while before nodding. Psionic energy. It shouldn't be a problem. I'll give it to Lesna later. The 2 of them stood up. After changing his clothes and getting taller, Zeller led Matthew to the hall where the mirror image ritual was set up. At noon, the 7 Saints Square in the center of Rolling Stone Town was packed with people. This was where many awards were given out. Although it had only started today, there were already many small contests that had already concluded. The contestants and their families and neighbors came to receive the award happily. A cheerful atmosphere pervaded the air. Under the statues of the 7 saints, 2 men dressed as traveling merchants were whispering to each other. In front of them was a large wooden box with a large string of cotton candy inside. Today is the best day to break out of the prison. Look, a large number of guards have been transferred to the square to maintain order. I dare to bet that there is no one in the prison at all. A man in his 20s said in a low voice. You're right, Jonas, but Dean doesn't want to come out. That is our main problem. The man who answered him looked to be in his 30s. He was thin, and his eyes were bright, but he always looked lazy. Leon, why do you think Boss Dean is not willing to leave the prison? Jonas was puzzled. Who knows? Perhaps the food in the prison was better. Leon grabbed a marshmallow for himself and said casually while eating. I keep feeling like we're two big idiots. We came to Rolling Stone Town and didn't even know the specific mission. Jonas said unhappily, they only told us to disguise ourselves and sneak into the prison. In the end, Boss Dean ignored us. Are we really here to sell cotton candy? Leon comforted, we're not the only two who are here. There are other members of the Brotherhood and 2 other organizations. Don't worry. They must be doing something big. We just need to follow the orders and observe the situation in Rolling Stone Town. Jonas's eyes glided as he looked at the people around him, who were filled with laughter. But I feel that we've been discovered. How could they laugh so happily? Did they recognize us long? Leon said helplessly. You're really too nervous, Jonas. Why don't you sit by the side? Jonas shook his head and said. No need. That will make me even more uncomfortable. Damn it. Why would this countryside town make me so nervous? You have to know that I didn't even feel anything when I set fire to the White Bull port stock. Leon licked his marshmallow. Do you want one candy too? Or, you can just participate in a competition and have some fun. That's a good idea. Jonas's eyes lit up. I just saw that the prize for one of the events is a big jar of honey. My mother likes to eat honey. Why don't I give it a try? Leon put down the cotton candy in his hand. Wait, are you serious? Why? Participating in the activities of the country bumpkins was also a form of scouting, right? Jonas pushed away the box in front of him righteously and then walked towards a corner of the square impatiently. Leon could only push the cart to keep up. Hey guys, it's time for the annual Martin Run. Wipe the soles of your shoes. Open your eyes. Remember to keep your balance and don't fall. Every year, people run into the manure pit or the drain, and that's not why we're holding the Martin Run. Remember, the route is very important. I'll repeat the route one last time. Start from the starting point, circle around the 7 Saints Square, and run to the east wall. When you reach the tower, remember to pick up the beacon. Then, turn back and pass through the craftsman area. After getting 2 beacons along the way, sprint towards the 7 Saints statue with all your strength. We will meet you there at the finish line. Now, everyone gets ready. Accompanied by the host's hoarse shouts, the surrounding crowd erupted into cheers and cheers. The Martin Run was the most popular event every year. Even other cities sent competitors over. Jonas was mixed in with the crowd, but he was not as nervous as before. He looked behind him. Behind the dense crowd of contestants, 3 people in huge fluffy uniforms were baring their fangs and brandishing their claws. They would play the role of the monsters chasing Martin in the event. The contestants were playing the role of the hero of the mythical story in Rolling Stone Town, the omnipotent and fastest Super Martin. Jonas had just listened to the host recount the story of Super Martin. He had to admit. That story was quite interesting. Hey, foreigner. A provocative voice came from beside him. Jonas frowned and looked over. The one who spoke was a fierce-looking big guy. Remember to scram further away when I speed up later. Otherwise, don't cry when you get knocked into the shit pit. Jonas was instantly annoyed. When he killed and set fire in White Bull Harbor, these country bumpkins were still playing house. He actually dared to take the initiative to threaten him. He wanted to teach this big guy a lesson. But at this moment, the host in front suddenly shouted. Martins, run! The crowd exploded. The 3 monsters let out strange cries. More than 40 people rushed forward. For a moment, the scene was extremely chaotic. Jonas was initially wrapped in the crowd. But very quickly, he found an opportunity to break out of the crowd. Arsonists were originally good at running, not to mention that Jonas was an outstanding arsonist. With a few swift moves, he had gotten to the middle of the group. Stop that foreigner. He just pushed me. The big guy's angry roar came from behind. Jonas sneered. He didn't expect these locals to be so uncultured. Do they even want to form cliques for a running competition? As expected. Suddenly, 2 men squeezed towards him. Jonas was angered. With a shout, his speed increased drastically. Whoosh. He passed those people like a phantom. Wow. The audience exclaimed from both sides of the road. Jonas was extremely pleased. Let these country bumpkins see what true speed is. He quickened his pace. He moved forward at an incredible speed. In the blink of an eye, he had already surpassed the first group, who had the advantage of starting the run first. So powerful. Good luck. He runs really fast. Amidst the enthusiastic cheers of the crowd, Jonas was completely immersed in the world of running. He tried to adjust his breathing and control his pace. The arsonist's strength was actually sprinting, but he did not want to lose to others, so he maintained a good speed even after taking the lead. The scene in front of him gradually became blurry. Only the cheers from both sides continued. Unknowingly, Jonas' hand was already filled with 3 beacons. In front of him, the finish line was just drawn under the statues of the 7 saints. At that moment, a tsunami of cheers came. Almost everyone was cheering for Jonas' wonderful performance. He was also greatly encouraged. He sprinted all the way to the finish line. "Let us welcome the champion of this Martin Run, Mr. Jonas. He is joining the race for the first time," the host roared. Everyone applauded. A few young men ran over enthusiastically. Someone helped Jonas put on the wreath that symbolized a champion. The others joined forces to lift him up and throw him into the air. He fell down, and then they threw him into the air again. Jonas. Jonas. Impressive Jonas. Everyone was celebrating enthusiastically. Jonas himself was completely smug. He enjoyed the crowd. In a daze, he was escorted to the makeshift podium by everyone. "Hey, the amazing Jonas," the host said loudly. "You are the well-deserved champion, and you even beat the previous record by a full minute. May I ask how you did it?" Jonas was about to answer. The host suddenly stuffed a large jar of honey into his hand. "This is the reward for the champion." Immediately after, a few fully armed garrison members appeared behind him. Ah! Before Jonas could react, he was already subdued by the powerful team members. "Sorry, but you ran too fast. We have reason to suspect that you are a member of the Silver Frost Brotherhood." The bearded leader explained apologetically, "Come with us. If it's proved to be our mistake later, I'll personally compensate you with a jar of honey." At that moment, Jonas felt his ears buzzing. He frantically searched for traces of Leon in the crowd. But he couldn't find Leon. All he saw were shocked faces. The people did not seem to have realized why the garrison team wanted to arrest this young man who was running so fast. At this moment, everyone was surprised to find that the sky had turned dark. Bang! At the same time, the clear sound of fireworks exploded in the man-made night. Colorful patterns spread out at any time. The crowd cheered and clapped for the sudden magic fireworks. "Ronan! Ronan!" Someone was cheering the name of the mage. When he heard this word, Jonas' muddled mind suddenly became extremely clear-headed. At that moment, out of the corner of his eyes, he suddenly saw a figure walking away from the crowd. That back view. It was the man he had seen in the portrait. Legendary mage. Ronan. No, this was impossible. I have to tell everyone this news. Ronan was not lost in the astral plane. He is still in the town. Jonas subconsciously struggled. However, he was completely lifted up by the garrison members. Then, he was mercilessly sent to prison. Rolling Stone Town, which was originally filled with joy, had its undercurrent surge again because of the brilliant fireworks. Hint, you have completed a large-scale bluff performance. You have mastered 2 basic elements of the deception domain, bluffing and trickery. In the hall that was reflecting rays of bright light, the arcane runes that activated long-range mirror image were extinguished one by one. Matthew blinked to adjust to the change in the light. "It's over. You did well." Zeller walked over from the side. As he removed the rest of the mirror image spell, he signaled Matthew to relax. Matthew quickly took off his stiff cloak and could not help but ask, "Is this really going to work?" The reason why he asked this was because he felt that he had not contributed much in the process just now. He was only disguised as Master Ronan and walked around the area that Zeller had planned out, trying to make himself look more like a legendary mage. Zeller explained the principle to him in advance minus. He would use the mirror image technique to present Ronan's image in Rolling Stone Town and the North-South Trade Post. At the same time, he ordered the others hiding at the scene to detonate the magic fireworks left behind by Ronan. Thanks to the strong festive atmosphere, most people would not notice Matthew pretending to be Ronan before the fireworks exploded. However, after the fireworks exploded, under everyone's conscious search, there was naturally no lack of observant people who would see Archmage Ronan. Then, everything else would follow. However, after the entire process ended, Matthew still had a strong sense of unreality. It's hard to say, but everything depends on one's actions. At least we've muddied the waters, haven't we? I still have some things to deal with. Give me a moment, please. Zeller smiled apologetically at Matthew. Then, he hurriedly walked to another side hall. Matthew had to remove his makeup himself. It was also at this moment that he suddenly received a notification from the system. The 2 elements of deception. Matthew touched his chin. Doesn't this mean that we've succeeded? Elements were the prerequisites for a domain. Under normal circumstances, if mortals wanted to dabble in a domain, they had to collect the elements of the relevant domain in advance. The more relevant elements they collected, the higher the possibility of them entering the domain. Elements were the key to accessing domains. But this didn't mean that it was the entirety of the domain. For example, Matthew had completely ignored the key and directly barged into the domain 3 times already. It could be seen how convenient the system was. Especially after unlocking the legendary path. Matthew could clearly feel that his entry into the domains was thousands of times simpler than others. Even this time. If it were anyone else, it would at most be a meaningful deception. Experience. Although Matthew did not directly step into the domain of deception, he had indirectly grasped 2 keys to the domain of deception. If he worked hard in this direction, he would have soon entered the domain of deception. According to Mage Ronin, domains were more advanced tools than spells. Matthew gradually realized that his natural talent in the field might be his greatest strength. Next, I can focus on the 3 domains I have now. I can cultivate in the 3 domains and obtain more abilities in the respective domains. I can also expand horizontally and get involved in other related domains. As he pondered, Matthew had removed most of his makeup. Zeller rushed in. There's good news. It proves that our work is not for nothing. Matthew looked at him curiously. Zeller smiled. When we were setting off the fireworks, Blake captured a member of the Silver Frost Brotherhood. Matthew nodded. Our garrison captain is quite capable. How did he discover that the other party is a member of the Silver Frost Brotherhood? Zeller couldn't help but laugh. It said that the criminal volunteered to participate in the Martin Run event and won first place. He ran so fast that people recognized him as a supernatural being at a glance. Was there such a thing? Matthew was stunned for 3 seconds. Then he must have accomplices, Matthew said. Zeller nodded and replied. This is obvious. The members of the Silver Frost Brotherhood usually work in groups of 2. Although we haven't found his companions, we can be sure that he and his companions have seen Archmage Ronin with their own eyes. Especially when he was arrested, he reacted violently. He seemed to be eager to pass on this important news. To be honest, I'm currently wondering if I should find a chance to release him. Matthew thought for a moment. There's no need to be too deliberate. Zeller agreed. You're right. There are so many people present at the late spring festival. The news will definitely spread. In short, we're doing well so far. Thank you for your hard work, Matthew. Matthew shook his head. I didn't help much. Zeller said seriously, at least you're a real mage. This is very significant in the aspect of anti-divination. All right, your mission is over. Next, we will deal with the 3 evil organizations. If there is nothing else, we will not disturb you anymore. Of course, if you're willing, I would like to invite you to join the Lord's Mansion formally. Your status is temporarily the Lord's Magic Consultant, which is similar to my role. Matthew's heart jumped. Will Reeker agree? Like and subscribe.